So there are many of these things, and it's up to the human to figure out which one the robot is talking about. Here, that ambiguity is removed, right? It says, hand me the white leg that is on the table. There's only one white leg on the table. This one's black. Okay? So this work is basically about how do you generate these kinds of utterances, right, that have the most information that you can convey to the human during runtime. Okay? And it's great work. Again, I encourage you to go and listen to that talk on Thursday. I'm not going to go into more details about this, but I just wanted to bring this up to show sort of the dichotomy between, there's work on planning time asking for help, okay, which was the symbiotic autonomy with the cobots work, but there's also work on execution time asking for help, which is this work, okay. And again, there are other papers, but I'm choosing to highlight just these two to show you that, it's not necessary that it should only be robots that always help humans. You can also use humans in the loop as helpers, right, as observation providers, as actuation providers, to complement things that your robot may not be able to do, or that your agent may not be able to do. Okay, so that was a very short, brief overview of the communication section, okay? And again, like I said, it can be expanded. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about two applications, okay? Two applications as part of a case study. Now, magically, both of these happen to be things that I worked on. One of them is human-robot teaming, which we'll talk about first. The second one is the problem of crowdsourcing, okay? So, can you introduce a planner into the crowdsourcing paradigm, okay? And can the planner actually help in that case? And the takeaway, I think, from this section 5 that I'm hoping I'll be able to get across to you guys in the next half hour or so is the idea that when you have an overall application to bring together all of these challenges, you really appreciate that, these things are tied together, that interpretation is not completely independent from decision support, and decision support is not completely independent from communication and so on. Sometimes you have multiple, like for sub-problems that you're solving as part of these application scenarios, you might have to handle multiple of these, and they're all tied together because there is one planner and there is one human, and they both have limitations that you need to overcome, okay? So the first scenario that I'll talk about is this problem of planning for human-robot teaming, okay? And, we've been talking about human-robot teaming for the past 3 hours, but maybe it's been a little amorphous. So let's try to give it some definition, right? So what is human-robot teaming? It's basically the problem of endowing robots, right, with autonomous planning capabilities, okay? That's basically what it is at the very base level. And it comes about, it's an important problem now because right now, a lot of the robots that we see, in the real world, a lot of deployed robots are nothing more than glorified remote operated sensors, right? So you keep hearing about drones, for example, right? Drones have very little autonomous high-level planning capacity on them, okay? They're basically being used as remote controlled either sensors or in creepy cases actuators, okay? And so in this kind of environment, human-robot teaming is becoming an important problem because you want robotic agents to be able to make their own high-level decision plans. You don't want to burden humans with their own problems plus the robot's problems as well. Okay, you want the robot to take as much autonomy as possible. Okay. Now, there are a lot of challenges in human-robot teaming. We chose to focus on 4 particular challenges. And again, actually, this is a quick overview of my thesis work as well. And I'll quickly show you a slide each from each of these challenges and how they relate to the human-in-the-loop planning challenges that we covered in this work today. Okay. So, and I'll come back to the slide after that. So, this was the schematic that, I think this has popped up once or twice earlier. So the idea basically being that in traditional planning, right, before, this is the scale-up classical planning, right, the idea was that you just had this yellow box over here, okay, so you had a planner, the planner assumed a fully specified action model, fully specified goals, completely known initial state, right, and it was content with just doing a one-shot planning process, okay. Unfortunately, once you start introducing humans in the loop and then other agents like the robot that the planner has to be responsible for, right, that it has to control, then there are a whole bunch of other issues that come up, okay, and these are all papers that you can download and read on each one of these problems that I'm going to talk about in the coming few slides. But basically the point of this very busy slide is to show you that there are a host of challenges that are born out of adding just this one extra agent in the world, okay, and what we ended up doing was basically creating a fielded prototype. So in our case, this was the planner SAPA replan, okay? And this is basically a planner that is able to deal with all of the challenges of human-robot teaming, okay? And it turns out that a lot of those challenges of human-robot teaming correspond almost exactly to the challenges of human-in-the-loop planning. Obviously, they're just instantiations of those human-in-the-loop planning challenges. And so this planner is actually available. If anybody's interested in using this planner, you can send us a mail. It's a research planner. It's not, it's not a commercial planner, but you can still play around with it. It's available. And okay, so here's the first problem. Oh, I might need sound for this one. Sorry, I need to activate the sound. Yes. Let me see if I can play this again for you. Cindy, man, so you really need to know. Does he think what group you were in? So that's a commander of the camera. Yes, he's in the room with the green door. Okay. I'll get one from him. What does it look like? It is a light box with a red cross on it. Okay. Okay, so this was some work that we did in human-robot teaming on this problem of open-world goals, okay? Which was basically the idea that if you interact with the robot and with the planner, so whenever you see a robot, you think of the planner as sitting on the robot behind it, basically controlling everything that the robot does on a high level, okay? So the idea here was, suppose the robot is told about a goal that references an object that was not originally in its knowledge base, okay? So this is a brand new object. This is why we call this open world goals, right? So these goals are not part of the robot's initial closed knowledge of the world, okay? So it's almost like you have to expand the robot's knowledge of the world in order to deal with these, okay? So in order to plan for these goals, obviously as a planner, you need some information, okay? And so here you'll see that, there are some aspects of interpretation/communication that come in, right? Because you have to query the commander for some information. You just saw that exchange over here where the robot was asking the commander what the object looks like, where the object needs to go, and things like that, okay? So here are some questions that are important. When do you start sensing? What do you look for? Like, what type of object are you looking for? Are there any distinguishing properties of that object, and so on? And then again, another very important question is, once you start sensing, you also have to determine when to stop sensing, right? Because sensing is an expensive action. Sensing consumes battery time, it consumes clock time, it's an expensive action. Maybe sensing involves querying humans, right? And humans might get irritated with you. So you want to know when to actually stop your sensing, right? And then finally, I think the most important question is, why should the robot sense at all, right? Is there some reward at the end of it, right? So for example, if I look for a med kit, right, and I'm able to get it to the commander, is there some reward awaiting me as the robot at the end of it? Why should the planner actually make a plan for this, alright? So that was the problem of open world quantified goals. I'm going to switch now to the replanning problem, okay, which is this problem of continual planning that I was talking about, except I spoke about it in the context of the Amazon warehouses, but originally we did some work in the human-robot teaming case for this scenario. So you might get new information which comes in, as the robot is going down, the robot actually builds this map as it's, proceeding in the world. So for example, until it reaches this door, the robot actually doesn't even know about this door, okay? So it might get new information based on which it has to replan, okay? So if it sees that opening, it sees that sliver of light coming from there in an opening, it might determine that, okay, you know what, this is a room that I actually need to go in and check for wounded people in, for example, okay? And this was way back. This was the first robot that we played around with. There might be new goals, for example, right? So the human might give it new goals. You just saw that in the previous case, right? Where he said, find a medkit and pick it up and go deliver it to someone else. And your requirement always is that when the world changes in this way, when you have new information, when you have new goals, you want your planner to be able to come up with a new plan while respecting certain constraints, okay? These might be commitment constraints, they might be cost constraints, they might be temporal constraints, right? Temporal both in the notion of your plan needs to be a certain duration or less, and also you need to find a plan really fast, right? Because you're controlling a robot in real time, okay? So those are the replanning challenges. So that was challenge number 2, and this falls squarely into decision support, right? So when you have a human in the loop who keeps interrupting you and giving you new information and new goals, how do you generate new decisions or new plans in order to deal with those. So this falls into the decision support challenge. The third thing that we looked at was this idea of model updates.
You are at a closed door. Push it 1 meter.
So the utterance over there was basically this. The commander basically said to go into a room when you're at a closed door, push it 1 meter. Okay? So from this, the planner is basically supposed to extract a new action for itself. Okay? And this touches on something that Rao was talking about, where, just before this section, he was talking about dynamics incompleteness, right? So domain dynamics. When your domain dynamics are incomplete, can you actually get information on completing that? Okay? So in this case, for example, the precondition would be you're at a closed door. The definition of the action is you push it 1 meter, and the effect is that you're in the room eventually. Okay, once you perform that push action. And this is a slightly more detailed look at it, which is basically this is a structured action representation. Okay, this is how actions are represented in PDDL, which is the Planning Domain Description Language. Okay, and in this case, I'm showing you how the utterance that you just heard in that video, right? How that utterance maps to a new action that will be submitted to the planner. Okay, so this is basically the idea that can you take new knowledge and can you use that knowledge in your decision support process. Okay, so that's about action addition. And finally, the
next is going to perform triage in room 5.
Okay.
I need you to take a med kit to room 1.
Okay.
So this was some work we did basically, and this actually touches on the plan recognition that I talked about at the very beginning. Okay. The idea here is that the robot has access to some information about some agent Commander X, okay? It has access to the beliefs and the intentions of that agent, and it's trying to simulate the future plan of that agent, okay? So remember this map that I was showing you, right? So the robot basically meets someone in the hallway, and this person tells it about the beliefs and the intentions of Commander X, okay? And what the robot is trying to do is it's trying to simulate a possible plan for Commander X to get to his or her goal, okay? And then the robot is doing all of this in the hope that it can achieve better coordination with that commander, okay? So in this case, this is basically what we did, that you map the robot's knowledge into a new planning instance, you simulate the plan for Commander X, and then you extract some relevant information, okay? So in this case, it was needed because you don't want the robot and the Commander X conflicting for the same medkit, for example, okay? So you want to make sure that you have a pretty good prediction of whether the commander is going to pick up this medkit or this medkit, okay? You don't want the robot to go and grab something that the commander was originally aiming for, okay? Now there might be scenarios where the robot's work is more important than the commander's. In that case, you might want to reverse it, right? You might want to go for the medkit that the commander is not going to pick up, for example. But all of this is born off the realization that humans, they're in the loop, okay? And you cannot control them. Humans are agents that you cannot control their actions all of the time. So sometimes maybe you actually have to plan around them, okay? So that's some of this work. And we looked at this in the plan recognition section as well. So that basically concludes a quick overview of the human-robot teaming work, okay? And I showed you that, a lot of the challenges that we handled, again, we handled a lot of these challenges before some of the theory of human-in-the-loop planning became evident to us, the stuff that we've been talking about today. But then it's clear that a lot of these challenges fall squarely into one of the three big challenges that we talked about today, either interpretation or decision support or communication, okay? And you can see that very clearly in human-robot teaming. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about before the wrap-up is I'm going to talk quickly about this crowdsourced planning problem, okay? This is another thing, another problem area where we've had a chance to do some work in the past couple of years, okay? And a quick intro for those who are not familiar with it. This is basically the process of, okay, crowdsourcing, okay? Crowdsourcing is basically the process of obtaining services, ideas from, a crowd of people, okay? And it doesn't have to be online, it's just that now it's online. But crowdsourcing has been going on for, centuries and millennia, right? Where if you have a general crowd of people and you try to take all of their opinions or suggestions, right? And you try to solve a particular task. It's just now, it's come in vogue because of the internet, and you have captive marketplaces of people who are sitting at home with a lot of time who are willing to work on these tasks for you, okay? And so one example application scenario that has received a lot of attention in the crowdsourcing community is this idea of travel planning, okay? So customized travel planning, okay? So suppose you go to a new city, okay? Suppose many of you have probably never been to Austin, for example, okay? So suppose you come to Austin and there's a service that promises to tell you what to do in Austin and to tailor that itinerary or that plan according to your preferences, according to what you specify, okay? And the way it's going to do this is it's going to use a crowd of human workers, okay? So it's going to say, you come in as a user and you say that these are the things, these are my constraints, these are my preferences, and I'm going to be in Austin for 3 days, okay? Then you give this problem to this system, and then it's going to break it up in such a way that these human workers can work on it and try to return a solution to you, try to return a working plan for you. So far, it's just humans, right? There's no planner in the loop. There's no automated planner as we've been talking about. Now, the interesting thing happens, so far, the problem that I've defined is only the left-hand portion of this schematic, okay? But the interesting thing happens when you insert an automated planner into the mix, okay? And you start questioning, right? You start saying, what are some things that automated systems are really good at, right? That humans are not very good at, that humans really are not reliable, whether it's a single human or it's a group of humans, like a crowd, right? So some of these things, which we'll talk about in the coming few slides, are things like, planners are really good at things like constraint processing, okay? So if your number of constraints, so suppose you have 1 or 2 constraints, you and I can solve that, right? What if you have 200 constraints, right? So to figure out if a given plan is valid, given those 200 constraints, automated systems are really good at that. Whether it's 2 constraints, 200 constraints, 2000 constraints. They might take more time, but they are consistent in their application of these things, okay? So that's just one of the things. So the schematic I want you to keep in mind over here is that you have you have multiple humans in the loop over here, okay? So you have one human who acts as the requester. So this is the user. This would be you, for example, if you're trying to use the service, okay? So this is a user who's paying for using the service. They basically specify the task as well as some of their goals and preferences and so on to the system, okay? You also have other humans who are crowd workers. These are the Turkers, okay? So these are the workers who get the specification from this human and they try to come up with a solution to that problem. Whether that solution is a travel plan, whether it's writing an essay for them, whether it's solving a math homework for them, whatever it is, right? This crowd of workers tries to come up with that, okay? And what you also have now is you have a planner in the middle, okay? Now, the planner actually has some challenges that it must confront, okay? The first challenge, the one we talked about first today, is this problem of interpretation, right? So when you have a human talking to, when you have other humans solving a given human's problems, right? They're going to be possibly collaborating in natural language, using text and so on. The planner is an automated system. It needs to interpret. First, it needs to get the context of what's going on, okay? Once it finishes the interpretation task, it needs to deal with decision support, right? Then it needs to say, okay, now that I've understood what these people are up to, right? What is it that I'm really good at, okay? What can I contribute to this problem? So, this was the interface that we basically came up with. This is some work by Lydia Manikonda and Tathagata Chakraborty. And they made this interface and we actually put it up on Amazon MTurk. Amazon MTurk is a captive, Turker base. So the idea here is that you have this travel planning system where this is the request that a user would come in and give, right? So this user, for example, says, I'm going to go to New York City, and then there are some questions that they have that they put in plain text. Where is a must-eat place? What are the must things I should really do in New York City? Off the beaten path things are preferred, and so on. And then there's also a slightly more structured component, right? Where they say, here are some of my preferences. Here are some things that I would like to do, and here are some constraints with respect to that, okay? Budget constraints, time constraints, and so on. And what you have is you have a collaborative interface here. So up to this part on the top is what your requester specifies. This is something a human specified, but this is the human requester, okay? This part over here is for the other kinds of humans to collaborate. This is for the Turkers, the crowd workers, to collaborate. So every time a crowd worker comes in and adds a suggestion, that's going to show up here. So this is like a public blackboard, right? Where you enable multi-agent coordination by having a shared space for these crowd workers to interact in, okay? And you have a map, and then you also have a list of to-do tags, which I'll come to in a bit, okay? And so obviously there are the human in the loop planning challenges to solve over here. The first one is the challenge of interpretation, which we've talked about, right? Which is, given that these humans are likely to be talking to each other in natural language, how does your planner figure out what's going on exactly? And there is an impedance mismatch problem here. You need to solve that problem. So that's the interpretation challenge. The way this interpretation challenge manifests itself in this particular application, right? So I want you to have a look at this screen. So this is the screen that is shown to crowd workers who are also humans. This is the screen that's shown to them and they try to add a new suggestion, okay? So you can see immediately off the bat that this screen has some structured components and some like semi-structured components, okay? So the really structured components are these drop-down boxes, for example, okay? So the number of hours, for example. There's really no way you can go wrong while extracting that knowledge, okay? But there are also some unstructured boxes, right? So for example, this is a text box where the user enters a suggestion for what to do, okay? And remember that work on extracting task plans, robot task plans from human collaboration. There's a similar problem here where you might have some noise when you're trying to extract what is the action that the humans are suggesting over here, okay? So we can see that they're saying walk near the NYPL, okay? But automated systems might have trouble extracting that almost exactly, okay? And you might have more complex sentences that are added on and so on. So that's an interpretation problem that needs to be solved, okay? There's also the capability for human workers to add critiques, right? So you can actually come in, and if there are existing suggestions, these are existing suggestions that previous iterations of human workers have added in, right? So I come in next as a human, and I can say that, oh, you know what, maybe Macy's is going to be too expensive, so I want to critique that. I want to say that this will exceed the $50 budget that the user had, for example, okay? So that's another interpretation problem. How do I figure out what is the criticism exactly that this user has for this particular step? And similarly for adding ordering constraint, right? So users can come in and say, you know, lunch always ought to be before touristy activities because people get cranky otherwise, okay? So this is another thing that where you're trying to extract knowledge from humans. You as the planner is trying to extract knowledge from humans, right? So those are the interpretation challenges. You also have decision support challenges, right? So you need to steer the crowd workers towards producing a suitable plan, a satisfactory plan, in a collaborative fashion, okay? How do you do that? First of all, it's an iterative process, right? So you know that you have the comfort of knowing that the planner doesn't have to get it right on the first shot, okay? It's an iterative process that can go through multiple refinements, okay? In particular, one of the kinds of decision support things that the planner can do is it can basically add these to-do tags, okay? So what it's doing is based off of the suggestions as well as what the requester originally wanted, okay? The planner is going to create these outstanding to-do tags, okay? And this may seem like a very simple thing, but it's actually very effective, right? Because another one of those things that automated systems are good at, that humans are not really good at, is keeping track of to-do items, okay? So if you cross a certain number of to-do items, say more than 20 or 25, you start losing track of them as a human, okay? But planners are really good at keeping lists of those, and what's more, enforcing those, okay? So every time I as a human or as groups of humans, you think that you are done with the task, the planner can come in and say, no, you know what, there's still 2 things outstanding, you guys have to address these things, okay? And planners are really good at that, humans not so much, okay? So that's one thing, for example, keeping track of to-dos, tasks that have not been completed yet, okay? And we actually have a way of doing this. This falls squarely into the decision support part, the challenge part that we were talking about, right? So in this case, the sub-problem in question is sub-goal generation, okay? So the idea here is that you give the planner a high-level PDDL action model. In this case, because it's travel planning, right? You give it a high-level model with action examples such as, visit, lunch, shop, things that are usually associated with touristy activities, okay? It's a different question where you get that model from. It's a very important question. Rao was touching upon some of that in the dynamics incompleteness discussion that he had, okay? And there's a lot of work on that sort of thing, but I'm just touching on this problem in this particular slide. So what you have is you throw out unsatisfied sub-goals as alerts, okay? Here's an example. Suppose the human workers said, visit Manhattan, okay? Now, you know from your high-level PDDL action model that visit has the following 3 preconditions, okay? And suppose there are no suggestions yet that resolve some of these, okay? So you can throw out these 3 things as unsatisfied sub-goals so that the next round of Turkers who come in, they iteratively solve this. So basically you start from one goal, right? And then you almost regress backwards, you do regress backwards in a sort of sub-goal generation spree until all of the possible sub-goals are either satisfied via actions or they're part of the initial state, okay? So this is something the planners are really good at, okay? Planner can burrow down, as long as it has the information in the model, it can drill down and it can show these alerts to the Turkers. So here's an example of that, right? So they put in a thing about Manhattan, they said, walk near the NYPL, go to Manhattan. So then the planner basically inserts this to-do tag saying, how do I get to Manhattan? Okay, and again, this is a very rudimentary interface, but you get the idea of what the planner is trying to do over here. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the case study section. Okay, so I talked about two particular applications that we were really involved in hands-on. One was planning for human-robot teaming, the other was planning for crowdsourcing. And both of these are still ongoing work, by the way, so if any of you are interested in it, please come talk to me or Rao. And I was specifically talking about these two applications in the context of the three challenges that we talked about today: interpretation, decision support, and communication. Okay, and we were looking at what are the various sub-problems in each one of these applications that falls into the category of interpretation or decision support or communication. Okay, and the idea here, I have to emphasize again, right? The idea here is that for any human-in-the-loop planning application that you are able to pick up, right, you will definitely find sub-problems that decompose into these three challenge areas, maybe not exclusively, right? So for example, over here, this sub-goal generation falls into both decision support as well as communication, right? What do you tell the humans to elicit information from them, but also how do you generate that, right? So they might be a mix, but you will definitely see the presence of these challenges no matter what human-in-the-loop decision problem you come up with. And yeah, that's essentially the end of the presentation part. I'm just going to quickly summarize with a recap of the things that we went over in this tutorial today. Right, so basically we looked at the human-in-the-loop planning problem, the HILP problem, and it raises several interesting, hard, open challenges for existing planning systems. Okay, and these challenges, they actually have a very intrinsic link to the kind of interaction between the human and the planner. Okay, what kind of role is the human playing, what kind of role is the planner playing, and these can change depending on the application that you're dealing with. Is it human-robot teaming? Is it crowdsourced planning? Is it mixed initiative planning? Is it symbiotic autonomy? Whatever it is, right? So this can change greatly based on the application. And the specific contributions we looked at, Rao went over a list of various HILP scenarios, right? Starting from the good old days of planning, and then now the resurgence of some of these applications. He also discussed some of the dimensions along which human-in-the-loop planning problems can vary, right? Again, this is not a complete look at these things. It's an exploration into what are the various challenges that we had to encounter and that we think other people who are doing work like this had to encounter. And this is work that is on the upswing. A lot of papers are coming in about this. A lot of people are working on this. So it's useful to think about it along these lines. So we identified three key challenges that are posed by these HILP scenarios. And we outlined some current approaches. Again, like I said, due to lack of time, I couldn't list all of the approaches, and I also couldn't go into the full details of all the approaches. But we did, in the end, present case studies from the human-robot teaming and crowdsourced planning to sort of give you an idea, to bring it all together and say, these challenges manifest themselves in all of these applications. Okay? And this was the table that we had about the dimensions of human-in-the-loop planning. On this axis, you have the various applications. You can add your favorite application if you're actually working on human-in-the-loop. And in fact, one of the things I have to say here is that a lot of people don't even realize that they're actually working on human-in-the-loop applications. You're working on your own problem, but more often than not, especially nowadays, there is a human component to it, and there's a lot to be gained from actually thinking of it explicitly. Even if you're not going to work explicitly on it, there's a lot to be gained from thinking about it in that particular aspect. So anyway, so you have these applications, and then you have these various modalities along which they vary, depending on the agents and the roles that they have. And the specific challenges, again, that we talked about, the first was interpretation, which is the planner needs to position itself. It needs to gain some context on what it is the human or humans in the loop are doing, so that it can actually help them, or it can, play an active part. The second, of course, is once it figures that out, it needs to commit to some sort of decision support. And the nature of this decision support can vary greatly based on the demands of the scenario at hand. Okay? And the final challenge we looked at was this idea of communication, because obviously, if a human is in the loop, a great deal of interaction with humans, it depends on solving these communication challenges. So we looked at both reactive ways of communicating and interacting with humans, which has to do with the generation of these explanations and excuses, and planning ways to do that. And we also looked at proactive ways, right? So we said, if there are certain things that that your agent cannot do, but you know that humans are good at it, can you actually plan ahead to use humans for those capabilities, whether they're for observation or they're for actuation. Okay? And so those are the 3 challenges we looked at. And then again, just to come back to this, I had a couple of people come up to me and talk to me during the break. You can talk to me after the tutorial as well. But this is by no means a closed tutorial. Okay, there are many other areas that we have been unable to cover because of the limited time, and there are many factors that are just on the boundary of what we touched on in this tutorial, but which can be their own tutorials, right? So, for example, human factors, right? It's really important to consider human factors in relation to whatever human in the loop planning application you're thinking about, right? Because human-robot teaming